someone made a proper decision and someone else overrode that decision. And I think that is what allowed this tragedy to occur. And so essentially the question becomes, who watches the watchdog?
The abuse and neglect of a child in Charlotte prompted state lawmakers to pass stronger child welfare regulations. From Maggie Valley to Middlesex, you're listening to the WUNC Politics Podcast. I'm Colin Campbell, Capitol Bureau Chief at WUNC News. This week, we're taking a closer look at the Dominique Moody Safety Act, which was filed in the State House and added to the state budget bill recently signed into law. The legislation addresses the death of 6-year-old Dominique Moody, who was abused and neglected while living with a relative despite visits to the home by social workers and law enforcement. I sat down with the bill's sponsor to learn more about how the legislation aims to prevent future tragedies and put more safeguards into the child welfare system. We also talked about new legislation on blockchain and digital currency issues. Representative Alan Chesser is a Republican in his second term representing Nash County in the House. This session, he's been serving as chair of House committees on regulatory reform and blockchain and digital assets. Representative Chesser, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been leading some of the efforts to develop new child welfare regulations in response to the tragic death of Dominique Moody in Charlotte last year due to neglect and abuse. How did you learn about this case, and at what point did you decide the legislature needed to get involved in this particular issue?
So I learned about it as much of the general public did through the media and the reports that we saw in the media. And so I started sending out some feelers and had my staff send out feelers to Mecklenburg County. And just based off of their responses, I felt like we were going to need to be a little more firm in our investigation.
What sort of stuck out to you is, hey, this is not just a random tragedy. This is something that was structural, and a lot of things failed, systems failed to get to the point where this child died.
Once we got behind the curtain and saw the amount of law enforcement involvement and the amount of CPS involvement in the case, and the fact that the child was allowed to remain in the home, that sent up every red flag that we have, and we knew we had a very tragic situation that we could not afford to allow to repeat itself.
You're on the oversight committee that held a pretty lengthy hearing with Charlotte and Mecklenburg County officials to determine what went wrong in this case. What were some of your main takeaways from the hearing on, where this could have and should have been stopped and this child be taken out of the home?
So my main takeaway, I'm still not sure that we can talk about publicly yet. It's still under court order, so it can't be disclosed, and so through confidentiality. But I'm hopeful that that'll become public sooner rather than later. But I alluded to it in the end of the hearing, which was that there was a decision. Someone made a proper decision, and someone else overrode that decision. And I think that is what allowed this tragedy to occur. And so essentially the question becomes, who watches the watchdog? So what is the process? What does the process look like when a supervisor overrides someone who's on the line? Is there a way to appeal that decision? And who is monitoring that kind of at large to make sure that there's not a pattern of gross misbehavior there?
How much of it is a resourcing issue of having enough people in these agencies versus having the kind of fail-safes that you mentioned where somebody makes the wrong decision, someone else is there to review it and make sure that the right decision ultimately gets made?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we were looking at, was making sure there was a balance and we weren't going to be punishing people for, just being overburdened and overworked. And unfortunately, I've worked in the military where it's pretty stressful. I've worked in law enforcement that's pretty stressful. You get overworked in all those environments, but you're still obligated to hold to a standard and make sound decisions, and you're still held to account for the decisions that you make. And so what we found in our research was that this wasn't a situation that occurred where a single oversight occurred because someone failed to see it because they were overworked or overburdened. This was a series of bad decisions, improper decisions.
You sort of alluded to this, but how much of this was sort of incompetence by the local agencies involved, and how much seems to be a structural problem where if you didn't do anything legislatively, this type of tragedy could easily happen again?
So not going to touch on the incompetence side, but from the structural side, this is not an isolated incident. It is an egregious incident, but we began to uncover a bit of a pattern across the state. There have been several tragic incidents over, say, the last 5 or 6 years that we've been looking at, and there was a bit of a structural issue there that wasn't necessarily at the state level, but seemed to be replicating itself at the county level in different counties across the state. So we took the opportunity to go ahead and address that from the top down to make sure that, see if we can't tamp down on that pattern proliferating any further.
So you co-sponsored the Dominique Moody Act with Representative Carla Cunningham to strengthen child welfare regulations, and as of this conversation, it's included in this budget bill. What would this do to change how child welfare regulations work?
So one, it has an escalation team in it. I think that's the backbone of the bill, is that extra watchdog on the watchdog portion that we talked about. Someone who can actually look at these decisions and make sure that they're, from a 30,000-foot view, hey, do we agree with this decision? Do we think they're making the right decision with the information that's in front of them or not? So that, I think, will help alleviate a lot of the conditions that led to Dominique Moody's death. The one piece that didn't make it into the budget, but we'll continue to fight for, was the new training model as far as recognizing risk and assessing risk. We've been able to start that conversation to say, hey, look, there was predictive risk modeling out there. We can leverage technology. It's not a replacement for the human element and human decision making, but it is a tool and an aid to make their job easier. And so to help kind of guide and make sure they're asking the right questions, make sure that they're following up. Essentially, it's a coach that helps point them in the direction and keep them on task and on target. So the funding for that didn't make it into the budget, but we're hopeful to keep pushing that forward.
Yeah, are you seeing a need for overall more funding for social services agencies as a result of what you found out about how these things happened?
Well, so we're looking at that. There's always a question of whether we need to put more money into it or divert money from something else that's no longer working. And so we're looking at the system as a whole to figure out what's still working and what's not working. What can we transition into more modern techniques?
I know sort of the core here is at what point does a child get removed from a home and put into foster care or some other situation for their own safety. I know this is something that's personal for you. You've got personal ties to the state's foster care system. Are we where we need to be overall with that system, ensuring that kids get what they need, particularly in situations where the home that they're in is not meeting their needs?
So it's difficult to just blanket say, yes, we're where we need to be when we know that these tragedies still occur. But I think these tragedies overall are outliers, but they're avoidable, which is what makes them so egregious. And so I think the system and the people that operate within the system, especially rank and file members, are doing, they've got a heart for the work and they're doing what they can. God knows they don't get paid enough, and so they're doing it out of love for the children, wanting to keep children safe. So I think we're heading in the right direction. We've got a good baseline. We're heading in the right direction, and we're just looking for areas that we can improve.
Do we have enough foster families? I know you've had foster kids in your home before.
No, that's a simple answer. We do not in our state. We have a huge delta between the need and availability of homes. We have kids that are staying in group homes. God bless group homes. I'm not demeaning group homes in any way, but the one-on-one attention, the one-on-one care that they can get in a foster home, I think is vastly superior. And so we are in desperate need. In Nash County alone, I think we've got just over 100 kids in care right now and somewhere just under 20 qualified foster homes. So, do the math. You expand that out, we're not a huge county. There's 100 counties in the state. I think we're short well over 1,400 homes in the state right now.
I'm curious, a little personally, what sort of called you and your wife to get involved and help out with the foster care needs that are out there?
That goes all the way back to why I actually got involved in politics in the beginning. And so during COVID, did the very condensed short version here. During COVID, my wife and I were pregnant with our sixth child, ended up being stillborn. And we kind of in that moment realized that we had set our whole life up to be able to provide for another child that we didn't have in our home. And my wife decided that she thought it would be appropriate to fill that void with a foster child. And we could love on the foster child, only to find out that because we already had 5 biological kids in the home, we were automatically disqualified from being a foster parent. And so that's where the Loving Homes Act came from when I was a freshman.
Yeah. So you feel like you've sort of been able to sort of complete your family by being part of this, and now that you've been able to sort of get around that issue of who gets disqualified from being in a program.
Yeah, I think it's just a way to turn tragedy into purpose and give back to the community. Just show love to kids who need it.
Now, so on a similar issue, as I was combing through the budget this week, there is actually some funding for the Middlesex Children's Home, which is probably not far from where you're at. Is that sort of a piece of the puzzle to ensure that facilities like that have more state funding to provide the services that they do?
Absolutely. It's until we get more foster homes online, we're dependent on these group homes, and we have to make sure that they're well funded and taken care of.
Well, switching gears a bit on topics, you also chaired the House Select Committee on Blockchain and Digital Assets, and the House passed a bill earlier this session that came out of that process. What would this particular bill do?
So it creates a regulatory structure and in compliance with the Federal Genius Act that was passed last year that allows stablecoin issuers to issue stablecoin for payment processing and kind of like a rewards program, for lack of a better term. Don't want to get beat up by the talking heads on Twitter for saying that, but just for layman's terms, it's hard enough to explain what blockchain is and what digital assets are to people who don't understand. So just kind of trying to paraphrase here. In every committee, someone asks me, what is a blockchain? What's a digital wallet? How do I create one? It's like, man, that's not where we're going with this bill. So, but what it does is it creates a regulatory structure to legitimize an industry in North Carolina that currently other states are allowing to operate in their state, and we're missing out on the opportunity. The federal government has recognized it. The federally chartered banks get to operate in that space, but our state employees' credit unions, our credit unions, and our state chartered banks don't get to participate in that market. So what we're doing is creating the regulatory structure to allow our state banks to participate in that market as well.
Yeah, how does a stablecoin differ from sort of your better-known cryptocurrencies like a Bitcoin or something like that?
Yeah, so regular cryptocurrency is backed by nothing other than the reputation of the coin and the technology that it's based on. And with stablecoin, it is backed one-to-one by either U.S. dollars or U.S. Treasury bonds. And so it is backed by a tangible asset that our economy is already running on.
So this is sort of a more secure. I mean, we've heard a lot of discussion this session about like the cryptocurrency ATMs, and the House and Senate have been working on regulations to kind of avoid fraud potential there. This seems like this is sort of a different direction to go in, creating some more security for folks that make these kind of investments.
Yes, so it is there to do that, but since it's going to be used as a means of transferring funds and processing payments, we wanted to make sure that it was backed by something. And so this is an element of the digital assets that has been created where it's literally tied to a actual currency or something that's backed by currency.
This is obviously a growing corner of the economy. How does North Carolina fit into that, and how does the policy that comes out of this building impact, how competitive we are with other states for where we're at in this landscape?
Well, I think if this bill passes through the Senate, we instantly become one of the front runners on this. We're already one of the largest banking industry states in the nation, and obviously, we are the Eastern Silicon Valley. We are, as far as technological advances, we're at the top of the list as well. And so this is I think a happy marriage between those two industries, and we're ripe for opportunity here if we seize it.
So does the regulatory landscape have a pretty big impact on where entrepreneurs choose to come out with these kind of digital asset products?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, you see it with Wyoming, which is just wide open, very little regulation in Wyoming, and New York, which is heavily regulated. And so we're going to come in the sweet spot, the Goldilocks spot, right in the middle, where the burden is low enough that the entrepreneurs want to come here and participate in the market, but we have enough regulatory structure to protect the investor.
As we're recording this conversation on July 1st, this particular bill hasn't moved yet in the Senate. Any opposition that you found on that side of the building, or just maybe not the priority for them in a busy short session?
I just don't think it's hit the priority mark yet. I think there's a little bit of pushback from the Banking Association, which is reasonable, that they would have concerns about it, but I think that the concerns are somewhat overblown.
You've also been working with Representative Mike Sheetselt on a bill that passed the House to exempt diapers and feminine hygiene products from sales taxes. How did that issue come about?
I mean, it's just affordability. Right now, everyone's feeling the pinch. I've got another bill that is repealing the grocery tax. Our state still has a 2% tax on groceries. It's an excise tax that's on top of sales tax. Right now, we were just looking for low-hanging fruits, easy ways to create affordability for families within North Carolina. And so when we started looking at things that we're taxing as a state, groceries came up, and feminine hygiene products came up, diapers came up, prescription drugs came up. I'm on that bill with Tim Reeder as well. So there's a whole slate of tax ideas that we kind of came up with, and we filed bills to repeal different taxes across all areas of the market.
Yeah, sort of broadly, what do you see as your philosophy on sort of where it's appropriate to have a sales tax on a particular type of item or purchase, and where it's such an essential that maybe it's worth being exempt?
So I think it's in where's the alternative? Like for feminine hygiene products, what's the alternative? Like they don't have one. What's the alternative for diapers? You don't have one. So I mean, we've got a product that people have to buy. It's not just a quality of life thing. It's a necessity. So why are we taxing it at the same rate that we're taxing, optional items or luxury items?
Now, one thing I hadn't thought about until I heard the hearing in House Finance the other day that I guess the group Diaper Train was there to talk about how so much of it's a daycare issue, which I didn't think about, that they require you to bring diapers for your kid to a child care facility, and then folks who can't afford that are having to miss work and not take their child into childcare.
Yeah, I mean, so you can't just provide diapers for the day either. You have to kind of bring in a certain number of packs per week in a lot of cases. And it's not going to be a huge cost savings, but we're at a point right now where we believe that if we can save something, it's worth fighting for.
Do you have a sense for whether the Senate's on board with that, or does the tax philosophy on the other side of the building kind of differ in terms of how sales taxes are approached?
So their philosophy is completely different than ours on the taxes, but have not had a conversation with anyone on the Senate side about that bill yet.
Yeah. Well, looking ahead as the session wraps up and we get into election season this year, you'll be seeking a third term in what's considered one of the most competitive House districts in the state. I'm curious, in a midterm cycle that polls seem to indicate could be tough for Republicans, what's your approach to keeping the seat and maybe outperforming other folks in your party this year around the country?
Just being genuine, just doing what I've done for the last two cycles, caring about the people that I represent, not so much the politics of it, and making sure that we're moving, Nash County and the district that I represent forward for each cycle that I get rewarded with to be here, and just hoping that the good Lord and the people of Nash County see me back.
I feel like you've been able to be on top of some of the specific local issues. I know Nash County, Rocky Mount have had various financial challenges, but also have a lot of potential for growth as this region continues to expand.
Trying to balance those. I try not to micromanage local government. That's not what I was elected to do. I was elected to come here and legislate in Raleigh. And I think if you're too heavy-handed with local issues, it can come back to bite you. The voters ultimately will hold the elected officials in Rocky Mount accountable. That's not my job. My job is to protect the people of Nash County. And so I feel like we've had a few pieces of legislation that have done that. We've got another one that isn't public yet, but it's coming. An extra layer of transparency and accountability that will be coming. But at the end of the day, it's up to the voters to hold people accountable.
Yeah. What do people outside of Nash County not really understand about the specific local dynamics that you've got to deal with in your corner of the state?
One, it's completely separate. It's almost, I say, a 45-55 split between rural and urban in my district. It is right down the middle. Rocky Mount, single largest municipality, followed by Nashville, and they make up about half of the population in the whole county. And so you have to run completely different issue sets from agricultural areas to urban city areas, and there are different policy agenda items that they want. It's a whole different way of life, and somehow we find a way to blend it together in this happy little marriage where sometimes people see us fighting on the news against one another, but at the end of the day, we all show up to the festivals, we all show up to the parades, we all show up to the events, the farmers market, and it's just one big happy family.
I want to wrap up on a lighter question that I've asked legislators on this podcast in the past. When you have out-of-town visitors come to your district in Nash County, where do you like to take them to show off the area?
I take them to the Rocky Mount Mills. That is, I think, one of the highlights, where we had a dilapidated building, old textile mill that was wasting away pretty quickly, and the community came together and decided they wanted to do something better with it. And I think it is a staple for how we handle development across the state moving forward. Had a provision in the reg reform bill that eventually got pulled out, but for commercial zoning use for mixed-use properties. There are high-end apartments in there. There's office space in there, restaurants, bars. Anything you want is on one campus, and it all intermingles, and it was a piece of property that was never going to be developed as an industrial site again. And I think that is a trademark that you see across eastern North Carolina right now, is we have industrial properties that are going to waste that will never be redeveloped as an industrial site. And there's an opportunity here to turn them into mixed-use properties and really watch the community thrive around them.
Yeah, so many different places that look like sort of an abandoned version of what Rocky Mount Mills is on different scales around the state. And I've been speaking with Representative Alan Chesser, Republican from Nash County. Thanks so much for stopping by and chatting with me.
Thanks again for having me.
And that's it for this week's episode. If you have any feedback on the podcast or ideas for future topics, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Raleigh Reporter, or you can contact me through our website, wunc.org. I'm Colin Campbell. Thanks for listening.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.